You want to play a role playing game where you can be people with superhuman abilities in Victorian. Wait a minute. Yeah, I guess you could do that with Star Trek Adventures, but today we're going to talk about Victorious. Hang around. Today we're going to talk about a little gem I discovered at North Texas RPG Con called Victorious. Victorious uses the Siege engine system, the same engine that was developed for Castles and Crusades, and it is, as you can tell by the cover, sort of a steampunk Victorian superheroes game. I had a lot of fun with this playing it at the con, and I actually got to play with and become friends with Mike and Liz, Mike Stewart and his wife Liz, who were involved in the creation of the game. The Three Castles winner for the year it came out. That's an award they hand out at North Texas each year. And subsequently, I've brought it home and run it myself and had a really good time with it. Now, before you think, oh, he's going to give it a glowing endorsement because a friend of his wrote it, there are a couple minor issues that I'd like to see addressed with Victorious. So it's not all going to be wine and roses, but mostly. So let's take a look. Troll Lord Games is the publisher, of course. They're also the publisher of Castles and Crusades and Star Siege, among other things. Table of contents, pretty standard. There's an explanation of some of the tropes of the Victorian age. And then we start talking about the arrival of superhumans and how to create your hero. Now, this is both one of my favorite parts of the book and one of the parts that took me a moment to quite wrap my head around, and I'll show you why in a moment. So, you are at first supposed to come up with the persona idea in your head. Then you roll up your attributes. They suggest 4d6 drop lowest. You choose the skills, and there is a skill system in this game. You pick your powers. Shortcomings can help you boost your powers, and then flesh out your details. You have the ability scores that you're used to. Strength, Dex, Con, Int, Wiz, Charisma. And it does use the Castles and Crusades scheme for modifiers. So if you're very, very used to the D&D plus or minus 1 for every 2 points above or below, you're going to have to remember that it's a little different in Castles and Crusades. This is actually an extrapolation of the progression from, say, Basic Expert or BECMI D&D. You'll note it goes much, much higher because we're going to be talking about superhuman characters. So skills will take the bonus from the attribute associated with them and add the skill level, and that's going to be your bonus to a check on a d20. Your target number is going to be a little bit different based on which of your attributes are considered prime, sort of like prime requisites in older versions of D&D, but it works a little bit differently. You can see the skill list here, and you are invited to create additional skills if there's something you want that doesn't appear here. We found almost everything that we could come up with in our character concepts represented by one or the other of the skills in this skill list. Here's the list of supernatural powers. Some of them are extremely powerful. For instance, armor, every level of armor gives you quite a bit of armor class bonus. +8 for the first level, and +5 for every level after that. And there is a term here that you should be familiar with if you're going to play Victorious, and that's temporal attacks. That does not mean attacks having to do with time or anything wibbly wobbly, timey wimey like that. Temporal attacks are attacks that are physical in nature: fists, bullets, kinetic attacks. So this gives you the sort of effect like Superman. He's invulnerable against all sorts of physical attack, but if you go after him with, say, magic, it's a different story. You can have absorption and absorb damage rather than just deflect it with armor class. Extra appendages, boosting your attributes. Now, this is where you could use powers to enhance your ability score rolls if you didn't like what you got. And as we go through, there's a lot of the usual suspects: blast powers, resistance to climate, Plastic Man elasticity, or Mr. Fantastic, things like that. The powers are all pretty straightforward, and the mechanics for them are by and large integrated pretty well into the D20 base of the Siege engine. So, let's move along. You can take packages of powers that allow you to purchase your powers a little bit more efficiently as far as how many of them you get. We use that quite a bit. There are rules for creating inventions and gadgets and things, which is really cool. One of my other favorite Victorian RPGs is Space 1889, and it has a whole chapter on things that your character can invent. I always loved that mechanic. And so here in Victorious, a less voluminous version shows up. But there is a source book for this game that expands on it a bit. You can choose shortcomings in exchange for bonuses to other things. And here's the part that I told you I had a little bit of a gripe with, and that is the heroic classes. Something that is easy to misread a little bit. The game both does and does not have classes. You can build your hero on a standard hero template, a lack of class, as it were, and then pick and choose the bonuses you want, like a better hit die or better hit progression, things like that. Or you can choose one of these heroic classes, and all of those choices are made behind the scenes for you. Now, these classes can be really useful to a starting group because they will give you some archetype ideas before you even sit down to make characters. You can take a look at the archetypes, and that can help form your mental picture of what kind of super you want to play. It also kind of helps with making sure that everyone is clicking in to their own role, so there's not a whole lot of stepping on each other's shticks. One of the things that you'll note immediately is that your hit points at first level are your Constitution score times 2. You tend to start with a generous amount of hit points in this game, which is pretty cool. The Contraptionist is a mechanical inventor type character. This one's pretty cool. I created a pre-gen for my players using some of these classes, and the hydraulic exosuit was a lot of fun in practice. Hypnotist. Now this is a cool one because we are both familiar with modern superheroes with psychic abilities, but hypnotism was kind of a thing, a fad in Victorian England. And so this really fits in the theme of the game. The Inquiry Agent. Once again, leaning into the Victorian tropes, this is your consulting detective. If you want to build a Holmesian character, this is how you do it. And we got a lot of mileage out of the one in our group. The Magician. I suppose this is Victorian Zatanna. The Paragon. Yeah, take a wild guess at what this is based on. Our Paragon character was a lot of fun too. And I initially created that character without a shield so that it wouldn't be quite so obvious. And the player looked at the pregen and says, I want to play this character. Can I have a shield? So that's what we did. The Radiant. The ability to manipulate radiant energy, electricity themes. We had a lot of fun with this character too, to be honest. The Strong Arm, that's your brick. The Vigilante, that's your bat. Once you're done selecting your class, figuring out your hit points, choosing your powers, then you go in and fill out all the other things on the character sheet. This is pretty standard to any D20 or Siege Engine game. Your initiative bonus, armor class. Now, you do have some different defenses based on the skills and powers that you choose. So armor class isn't the only thing you're going to be looking at. And since there's different modes of attack that in D&D we really just handle with saving throws. In Victorious, there are different defenses you can buy versus different kinds of attack. So you can create heroes that are less vulnerable or more vulnerable to certain types of attack. Again, like we said with temporal damage, you can be really good against physical blows, but not quite so good against energy bursts or hypnosis. Alignment is a thing. And then you get your first allocation of victory points. These are sort of your hero points, plot points, bennies, whatever you would like to call them, but in practice they flow pretty quickly. The game does not concern itself as much with bookkeeping as far as how much money you've got in your pocket. You're more or less given some guidelines on wealth. So the rules are the basic rules from the Siege Engine. And by the way, here's the chart for that base superpower class that doesn't have the bells and whistles figured out for you. And then you can just build your own. XP in this game is handed out for more than just straight up defeating foes. As you can see under XP modifiers, there's plenty of fun things that you can do that don't necessarily lean into mayhem and destruction. There's built-in awards for role-playing. I always love to see that. Combat is pretty straightforward. We have initiative. You have the choice to move your full movement rate, to attack, to activate a defensive power, to dodge. You can active dodge in this game. Grabbing, throwing, concentrating. And you do have the ability to move half your standard move and still make an attack at the end of it. There is a good example here of combat. You can read through it and get a pretty good feel. Now, here's where there are a couple of page XX references that were left in. But you can find what you're looking for fairly easily when you're referencing those. So again, a lot of the concepts here very familiar to someone who plays almost any version of D&D and especially the other Siege Engine games. Armor in this game is not really as impressive as it would be in a game without superpowers, because someone can pick up the armor super ability and be much better armored than anything you can get as just let's shrug it on or belt it on armor. You'll see that heavy metal armor is only a +5 in armor class, where the base armor power is a +8. But for those characters that do not have any sort of superpowers, and a lot of times this might be your vigilante or your consulting detective, as far as like straight on physical superpowers, say like Batman, you might want to build some armor into your character just for that little bit of extra protection. So there's explanations on how damage works, the fatigue mechanic, how invulnerability works if you have that power, and the ability to push an attack. This is pretty neat. You can put some more oomph into your attack to try to do more damage, but you will burn a point of constitution to do so. Attribute bonus. I think that's pretty cool. There's a list of equipment. And an explanation of how attributes work. Now, the Siege engine uses a system where there are 2 base target numbers. One for an attribute that is not prime, and then one that is 6 points lower for an attribute that is prime. So in effect, rather than giving you a bonus to the die roll with a prime attribute, you simply have to roll lower than you do with a non-prime attribute. Something to be careful about. Prime attributes can be variable. Most of the classes have 2. At least one of the classes only has 1. And one of the pre-gens I built using the straight up build any hero you want, I forgot to give them any primes at all. And the player that chose that character was a little miffed at me about it about halfway through the game. They still had fun, and the character was still useful. But upon hearing some of the lower target numbers that the other players were getting on some of their rolls, the player was like, hey, wait a minute, why are my numbers so high? Yeah, well, it was my first time making pre-gens, sorry. But that's something to remember. If you are building a completely free-form character, remember to put some primes in there. So this does have basic saving throws, just like D&D. The challenge base is 18 for a non-prime attribute, 12 for a prime. So you really want those prime attributes in the saving throws that you think you're going to come up against a lot. And then we talk about the victory points. Victory points are awesome. The Gentile Magistrate, or Game Master, the GM can hand you victory points every time you do something cool. This is the ability of the GM to reward characters for making the group laugh or impressing you with a really awesome ability, what have you. Victory points are meant to be spent. It's pretty clear in the text that the author intends that victory points flow. Victory points are pretty cool in that they give you bonuses to the rolls that you're making, and they can help you achieve some things automatically. Like a victory point can be dropped to say, I hit that bad guy, or I'm going to fire this grapple gun at this really difficult target, but you know what? Here's a victory point. I automatically make it. In practice, we found that this allowed for some truly epic superhero roleplay, like ridiculously epic. Most of the players hung on to those victory points towards the until the very end, until the boss fight at the end of the adventure. But a couple of the players got the idea that if they spent them to do something cool, chances were I was going to toss them another one at some point. Now, having those victory points left over for the boss fight meant that the boss fight was really interesting, and a lot of cool creative uses of abilities and smackdowns happened. It was pretty awesome. So alignment is a thing, but it's used a little differently in Victorious. Lawful, neutral, and chaotic is one axis of alignment. The other axis, however, is grand, gilded, and grim. This is the alignment of the chronicle, of the campaign. So grand, gilded, and grim are sort of your level of grit and level of how close is this to a comic in tone, how close is this to a street level game in tone. You choose one of the three to set the tone you want from your chronicle and to communicate to your players what your intent as the genteel magistrate is for the game. And then, of course, lawful, neutral, and chaotic defines what side you're on. So we have some really cool information on what things cost, how to convert currency, because unlike modern day when there's the euro, there's all sorts of different currencies with values all over the chart. But if you want to get that feel of immersion, here's how you convert things. Now, they do give you prices in the British pound and the American dollar, since that's probably going to be the most common areas you're adventuring in and currencies that you'll be using. You have an explanation of how travel and communication worked in the Victorian era, because it's very different from how we do things now. And a modern person is going to have a very different concept of how long it takes to get places and how convenient it is to do so. Now, the custom vehicles rules came into play for us because one of our players decided he wanted the Victorian version of the Herkimer Battle Jitney from Mystery Men. And our inventor character was like, done. And he actually did toss one of his starting victory points to talk me into letting him build this vehicle. Because I wanted them to be able to get around, it worked out just as well for the GM as it did for the players. And so we had this electric vehicle powered by the Radiant character, who had all these electric powers he got from being in an accident in an actual electrical battle between Edison and Tesla. He was our American character. And so as a joke, once they built this vehicle, he dubbed it a Tesla after his old boss. In any case, he was the power source for the vehicle. He would supply it with the electricity he was able to generate, and they were able to roll around London in this thing. Now, one of the things that I still laugh about in hindsight is one of the players brought up, hey, this thing is this huge horseless carriage. It's going to scare people. We need it to look like it's at least being drawn by horses. And so they came up with the idea to put what amounted to carousel horses in front on a cam so that they moved as it rolled down the street. Anyway, you've got the ability to build custom vehicles in this game, which is something I absolutely love from Space 1889. However, in Victorious, it's a much simpler thing. I spent many hours playing with like the Ether Flyer rules in Space 1889, and I may or may not have used spreadsheet software at one point. You will not need that for Victorious. There are rules for coach chases. We used these. They were a lot of fun. And then there are some random event tables. Those of you who have listened to some of my reviews know that I love a good random events table. In fact, my whole Mech Warrior campaign that I'm running for our gaming club right now is entirely predicated on random event rolls as far as what's going on in the greater universe. So the players, of course, control their destinies and make their choices, but the Battletech universe has 5 huge interstellar empires that are always trying to screw each other over, and so we use the random event tables to figure out what's going on in the greater world while our characters are on Dustpall Planet Z fighting the local pirates. So having some of these tables are pretty cool because they'll tell you encounters, but I also use this one for things the players will see in the newspaper in the morning. What happened last night that we weren't witness to? And does it have something to do with what we're investigating? There's a list of espionage agencies, which I absolutely love, in case you want to get your top secret on in the Victorian era. And then there's NGOs, non-government organizations. Definitely fodder for bad guys right here. Chapter 4 covers what it's like to live in the version of Victorian England that Victorious describes. It does talk about some of the unfortunate societal tendencies of the Victorian era and how to address them or not address them in your games. Here's lists of crimes, slang, and generally how it's dealt with. And then a handy dandy chronology to tell you when things happened. There's a bestiary for all kinds of creatures and bad guys that might show up. No game is complete without one, and we did actually throw some of the more interesting little characters into our game, including mummies, and the sewer crawlers. I love the sewer crawlers. They showed up in the sewers, and everyone thought they were creepy as hell. So here's the chapter about Supermankind and some sample super characters. The first Victorious game I played at the convention, we did actually run into Holmes. Here are some sample bad guys, including Count Dracula, which is awesome. Moriarty is a statted bad guy. In fact, the Moriarty family shows up as one of the NGOs that can be rolled into your game. There is a sample adventure here. We're going to skip over that because we don't want to spoil it. And then we have Mike's designer's notes. And some appendices. All in all, I really enjoyed this game. The Appendix N of Victorian fiction and historical texts. Yay! It's always good to know where to go. So how does it play? Well, it plays quite well. There were only a couple of issues that we had with the game, and those were from me not understanding character creation as well as I do now. Again, I forgot to give primes to one of our characters, which made life difficult for them. And it took me a little while to realize that I could just build my own super from scratch. And that's the character I messed up on and didn't give primes to. But I thought I would test the rules out. Character creation is not difficult. You will flip back and forth a little bit looking some things up. But it's not terrible. It's certainly easier than some Supers games that I've played, especially the ones that almost require software. Hero System 4th Edition, I'm looking at you. But this is a great diversion from bog standard Supers games. Most of the games that we have are based on sort of modern comics or Silver Age comics, which is not a bad thing. There's some wonderful games out there. I love the original Marvel superheroes. I love the cut down version of DC that they published when the Batman film came out in '89. I've had a lot of fun with the current version of Villains and Vigilantes, Mighty Protectors. That one's pretty cool. But Victorious slides into a superhero area you don't really see that often. And of course, immediately I think of examples and prove myself wrong, like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. But as a role-playing game, it hasn't really been addressed that much. We've got games like Castle Falkenstein, which is sort of Victorian Shadowrun, and Space 1889, which, good lord, I don't even know how to describe that one. It's pretty steampunk. Victorious slides superheroes in there. And it's an angle I had not considered until people started telling me about this game. It's a blast. It's perfectly playable out of the core book alone. And it is available on DriveThruRPG if you want to go pick up the PDF. So it does have my recommendation, but it could use an update with a little bit more of an editing pass and maybe a reorganization of the introduction of a couple of the concepts that it took us a minute to find. But once we found them, the game runs very smoothly and rather intuitively. So that's my review of Victorious. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope you do too if you're into the concept of Victorian supers. Sorry this video took so long to get out. Life's been a little bit on the crazy side with the day job. But we're back, and we're going to try to put out a couple of videos sooner than the normal 2-week cycle so we can sort of catch up on missing content. That's all for today on the Old Dragoon. Remember, character is what you are in the dark. Good night, everybody.